Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maddie and today I'm going to be giving you my top 10 most disappointing reads of 2019. These are not necessarily bad books. They're not necessarily the worst books I read in 2019, although some of them are. These are more ones that really let me down. And I am going to be going in order, counting down from 10 to 1. Number 10 is We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. This is a YA contemporary story with some hard-hitting themes. When I went into this book, I was expecting something completely different. And I don't know if that's because every time I heard about this book, people gave a very vague synopsis of the story and I just read into it too much and came to the wrong conclusions about what the book was about, or if someone just flat out told me wrong. All that to say, the plot of this book was not what I expected. I actually did give this book a pretty good rating, but overall, the story was lacking something for me, and it wasn't because I had wrong expectations of the story. It was just missing something. This book follows an 18-year-old girl who up and left her life and went to college without telling anybody where she was going, and she hasn't had contact with anyone from her previous life. And it's all because something major happened in her life that she doesn't really want to face. And it's Christmas break right after her first semester of college, and her best friend actually shows up and tries to spend some time with her and convince her to come back home. This book focuses on friendship and family and just relationships in general, and because of that there wasn't really a whole lot of plot, which is probably why I didn't enjoy it. For most of this story, the main characters are trapped in a dorm room because of this big snowstorm, and so they're kind of just reflecting on their memories of the past and what happened between them and what happened in the main character's life. And I usually do still love character-driven novels, but this one for me, I guess I just didn't really connect with the characters and I couldn't feel for them even though I was supposed to. And there is an element of grief in the story, and I thought I would really connect to that as well because I have lost several people in my life and I didn't really connect with her in that way. So that's probably why I was so let down by this book. Overall, I guess it's still a pretty good novel. It was just disappointing for me personally. It's also pretty short. Number 9 is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a YA fantasy Beauty and the Beast retelling. Overall, I like this story as well, but the world building fell flat for me. There's this one character who is like a fae king of like this old realm kingdom that is since lost, but he's still like mysterious and almost kind of like a god type character. So he's not actually a character in the story, but he plays a major role, and it didn't make sense whatsoever. It was kind of just completely brushed over, and honestly, like, I don't even remember exactly what happened, but it just didn't make sense to me. That's what I remember. It wasn't fleshed out at all, and there was very little information to explain to you who he was and what his role was within the story. And obviously, as you can tell, I'm having a hard time just describing him because the world building surrounding him just fell so flat. The romance in the story was the typical Beauty and the Beast romance, and I enjoyed it for the most part, but it also happened super fast. It was very insta-love. It didn't make sense for them to fall in love, in my opinion. It was like they hated each other. He's super mean and rude, and he's dragging her along as a prisoner, and then suddenly, as they're walking through the forest, not doing anything, like nothing is happening, but they're walking through the forest, and then somehow they fall in love with each other, and it just didn't make sense. If you can look past that, you'll still probably enjoy the romance because I'm able to do that with most books, and I did end up liking the romance if you just like kind of shield your mind from what's actually happening and just enjoy the romance for what it is. One thing I did like about this book is the unique spins on the fae. In this world, fae lack beauty, so they use beauty from the human world in order to entertain them. They also use glamours and stuff, and so it's like they have everything but human beauty, and they want that for themselves. So this was a unique spin on fae that I appreciated about this book. But overall, I was disappointed by it. People love this book so much, and they were raving about how great it was. And then I read it and was let down. Number 8 is The Girl the Sea Gave Back by Adrienne Young. This is a YA fantasy Viking-esque story, and it's also like this weird romance. The two characters don't know each other, but somehow they had like this mental connection and this like they're destined for each other, and they know that the other person's out there, and then when they meet, it's like, oh my gosh, you're the love of my life, even though they've never even spoken to each other before. Which actually isn't the worst part about this book, and that actually didn't bother me that much about the story. The main issue I had with this book is the lack of plot. It was so boring and nothing was happening except random fight scenes on occasion, and the world building was very much lacking, and some things just didn't make sense. All around, this book could have used several more revisions. So much more could have been added to this story to make it better. I didn't like this book. I ended up caring for it towards the end, but if I look at how the beginning was and how much I wanted to DNF this book, I can't really say that I thoroughly enjoyed it because I didn't. And it also was disappointing for me because it looked so cool, the concept looked cool, because it is a Viking story with some Norse mythology, which I always find interesting, and the magic system sounded very promising. The main character is able to see into the future. The book cover is also beautiful, so I had high hopes for this book, and obviously it disappointed me. Number 7 is Carve the Mark by Veronica Roth. This is a YA sci-fi-esque fantasy dystopian, all of those kind of mixed together YA book. This book was not memorable for me, and I remember when I was reading it, it wasn't that I didn't like it, it was just predictable, and it was very similar to things that I had read before, and so I wasn't very honed in to the story because I just didn't care. Usually I still enjoy books like that if I can be on board with the romance and root for the romance. It kind of drives the story for me, and I'll still end up loving it as long as I like the romance. And with this one, it wasn't that I didn't like the romance. There was just nothing about them that made them unique. There was nothing between them that made them have a really strong connection. And it was obvious what the outcome was going to be, so there wasn't like any tension or angst or fear surrounding any of the characters. It really fell flat for me, and I wish that wasn't so, but I mean, it happened. I had relatively high expectations for this book because of the author, but I did hear a lot of negative opinions surrounding this book. There was a lot of controversy surrounding it, and so I really didn't know if I was going to like it or not, but again, because of the author, I felt like I would love it anyway. And like I said, it wasn't a bad book, it just wasn't that memorable. Number 6 is Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve. This is like a YA dystopian with like some sci-fi technology elements, not necessarily like space sci-fi. In this book, the cities of the world are now like floating cities. They hover around the Earth's surface because the Earth is no longer inhabitable and resources are running out, so the cities float around trying to conquer other cities in order to survive to gain their resources. There's also like a hierarchy class system within each city, so like higher classes live at the top of the city and the lower classes live at the bottom of the city, and they're kind of almost like slaves at the bottom. I was excited to read this book because I had seen the trailer for the movie adaptation and it looked really interesting, so I had high hopes for the novel because I wanted to read it first before watching the movie, and this one was an okay book. It wasn't that great, it didn't grip me, and I think that's why I didn't like it as much. It necessarily wasn't a bad book. The writing was fine, the story was fine, the characters were fine, but there was nothing that I connected to. I don't really have much to say on this one, so I'm just going to move on to the next book. Number 5 is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, and I know, don't hate me, this is a YA middle grade fantasy series, and it's like people's childhood. They love it. I wanted to like this book. I read it at the very beginning of last year, so it's pretty much been a year since I read it, and it wasn't that great, honestly. Like, I can understand why some people like it if they have like a sentimental attachment to it, but because I read it in my adult life rather than when I was a child, I can tell you that it's not that great. This one obviously disappointed me because everyone loves it and I didn't. The actual characters and the story itself was fine. The plot was fine. It was more like the tone of the story didn't vibe with me, and also I didn't really care for the world that much. I didn't care for the magic system or anything besides like the bears, whatever they're called. I'm sorry, I don't remember. Number 4 is I Am Number 4 by Pittacus Lord. This is a YA story about aliens. And it was honestly like how Twilight haters describe Twilight. All of those things that they hate about Twilight is what I hated about this book. The writing was cringy, the romance was cringy, it was super tropey, super predictable, and it felt like the maturity of this novel was more geared towards middle graders and children, except it was YA, so it was like, it almost kind of felt like an insult to teenagers, saying like, look how dumb you are, you're not going to be able to figure this one out. I'm going to move on. Number 3 is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This is an adult historical fiction story set in World War II, and I hate to put this book on this list because people love this book so much. It's people's favorite historical fiction of all time. It's some people's favorite book of all time. And I will say that objectively, this is a fantastic novel. The writing is amazing. The story is so beautiful. The characters are great as well. But overall, this book was too slow for me. And with it being historical fiction, I pretty much knew that it was going to be at a slow pace because most historical fictions are super slow. But they're very much character driven. And my problem with this book is although objectively the characters were great and they had a lot of dimensions to them, I didn't connect with them at all. And I can't love a character-driven book if I don't love the characters. So with that being said, please take my opinion with a grain of salt. I just was disappointed by this one. I still give it a high rating because objectively, I know it's a great novel. I was disappointed. And don't kill me, but number 2 is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is an adult fantasy magical realism story, and I like the concept about this book. It's about these two magicians raised from the time they were children to adulthood to compete against each other in like this circus magical competition thing. It's supposed to be like really high stakes, really action packed, and it's not. Like, why is this book branded action packed, high stake competition when it's not? It's literally just these two characters doing random magical acts over the span of a couple years, and it's not even like they're going head to head. It's just one person does their thing over here, one person does their thing over here, and the anonymous judges are looking at each of their works over the span of several years to determine who's the better magician and who wins the competition. So it's not like they're fighting to the death or anything like that, which is what I thought it was going to be. Also, this book has hardly any plot whatsoever. Oh my gosh, this book really let me down in that area. Also, there's a focus on the romance, which I wanted more of. You don't even get to know them really as individual characters, much less how they are together. Obviously, this book really let me down and made it to number 2. And my number 1 most disappointing read of 2019 was Speak by Lori Halse Anderson. This is a YA hard-hitting contemporary story following this girl who was raped right before her freshman year of high school, and it follows her throughout high school as she deals with this traumatic event in her life. And it's also supposed to be about her PTSD, although I would argue that there's very little PTSD representation in this book at all. So here's a synopsis of this book. The main character was at this party with her best friend the summer before they entered high school, and at this party there was a lot of illegal activity going on, like drinking and things like that. And this older high school guy at the party starts to take an interest in her, and he kind of takes her off to the side, and they start heading towards the woods where no one can see them, and he rapes her. So she calls the police, and she tells them where she's at, and the police bust this party. And a lot of people get in trouble with the law, and so now as she's entering high school, everyone in the high school hates her because they think she just called the cops to bust this party. They don't know what actually happened to her, and she doesn't tell anyone about it. She is ostracized from everyone, including her best friend, so she has no friends. Literally everyone in the high school hates her. She has to do life completely by herself. She also has some family issues going at home. She holds everything in, and this book is supposed to be about her gaining the courage to speak out, hence the name of the book, Speak. But that message really fell flat for me. Even though she does eventually speak up, she's very hushed and quiet about it. And to me, if you're going to write a book about a girl who is sexually abused with the intent of encouraging other people who have been sexually abused to speak up and stand up for themselves and speak out on what has happened to them, then you need to really deliver. Yet even after everything at the end of this book, the main character is still very hushed and quiet, and she doesn't really speak out about what happened to her. So in my opinion, the message doesn't really come across. It basically is telling readers that, yeah, you can speak up to what happened to you, but, you know, you may want to keep it kind of quiet because, you know, you don't know how people are going to react to you. You never really know how it's going to go over. So don't really be brave. Don't really speak out about what's happened. Don't really speak out about how you feel. Don't really speak out about how your best friend abandoned you after you were raped without even talking to you about why you called the cops. Don't speak out about how teachers ignored the signs and even in many ways mistreated you. Don't speak out about how your family didn't notice something major went on in your life for 4 years. You know, you don't want to step on anybody's toes. That's the message I got from this book, instead of speak out about your experiences and how you feel. As you can tell, I have strong opinions about this one, but I'm actually going to get on to a different subject, and that is the PTSD representation in this book. This book is labeled as a book with PTSD representation. And I will say that the main character does have PTSD, but it never focuses on that. It never even looks into her PTSD symptoms. It just talks about it in vague terms. For example, it talks about how she doesn't sleep at night, but it never outright talks about her PTSD. It never really gives you a deep look into how she feels. It's like as the reader, you're looking in from an outside perspective on her life, and you notice that, yeah, you know, she probably has PTSD. Yeah, she's probably having a hard time, but you're not inside her head to see her go through those things or to feel what she's feeling, to experience and witness what she's going through, which was a letdown for me because I'm a behavioral health student studying to be a counselor for young girls who have been sexually abused. So this book wasn't a bad book. I actually gave it a high rating. It's just, it wasn't what I felt like it should have been. I felt like she really dropped the ball with this one. If you're looking for a book with a similar storyline and similar themes, similar topics, then I definitely recommend The Way I Used to Be by Amber Smith over Speak by Lori Halse Anderson. The Way I Used to Be was everything I wanted from this book. Alright, those are my top 10 most disappointing reads of 2019. Again, I just want to mention that not all of these were the worst books of 2019. They're just books that disappointed me. Let me know in the comments down below what was one of your most disappointing reads of 2019, or just let me know what you feel like was the worst book you read last year. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more bookish content by me. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.